Hello, wonderful people. This is Francisco, founder of Fear Fantasy. Welcome to the Mind Shapers, the BizAcc Q1.18 series.
Welcome to one more episode of the Mind Shapers, the BizAcc Q1.18 series. I'm very thrilled to have you here. And first of all, I want to give you the opportunity to present your business, what it's all about, and how is it going?
The business itself is fundamentally, I'm trying to not use the word coaching, but I think the word coaching is going to end up being the one that most people will recognize. But fundamentally, what higher functioning aims to do is to provide people who find themselves, who have self-diagnosed as having high functioning depression, with tools to cope with that high functioning depression.
Yeah.
And some people don't know what high functioning depression is, and strictly speaking, it's not a legitimate diagnosis. It's one of potentially 3 or 4 different kinds of diagnosable depression, but it's generally speaking mild, and it has quite a lot to do with one's own thought processes and the way one engages with the world, so perfectionism and that sort of thing. And so what I tend to think of it as a negative feedback loop. So you spend too much time thinking about things, you're scared of things, you're focusing on the wrong aspects of what's going on in your life.
Totally,
And because of the way that you're focusing on those things and the way that you're responding to those things, you basically sort of close in on yourself. So I call it a negative feedback loop. And the idea is to provide simple tools that aren't going to be too difficult to adopt, that will help to reverse that feedback loop and push one back up the other way. So
yes, that's awesome. That approach of the negative feedback for me makes all the sense. It's very clear to understand. And I have this vision, we can choose to go upwards or downwards on this spiral of hope, because we have the beliefs, the potential, and the action we take, and the results, and everything is connected. And I've learned this a few years ago, but it's really interesting to find that. And what I don't understand is why this society doesn't take that as we more seriously, I guess. We have to be diagnosed, but who is doing that? Why can we just accept that we are going into this down spiral and let someone help us,
Yeah, well, I think part of the problem is, from my point of view, and if you want to get into the sort of somewhat deeper stuff, I think fundamentally the problem is the problem is a fairly European Western one. I was reading an article yesterday about how the American idea of mental disease has been exported to the world, and so the American understanding of the self, and I guess more broadly the European understanding of the self is kind of what's going on. And so fundamentally what you've got, I think, is the very sort of self-centric view of the world that comes from Protestantism, coupled with the Protestant work ethic, which ignores that the human animal needs to be more than just a thing that works, but also a thing that loves and laughs and lives. And that society, even when it says, oh no, you should have work-life balance and all that sort of stuff, is kind of set up to make you feel like crap. If actually you only want to work part-time and you actually want to engage with other things that don't make money, and that somehow being happy with having not very much is weird and all that sort of stuff. And I think the way that I'm sort of looking at it is that high function, certain instances, because I'm not going to say this is true for everyone, but certain instances of high functioning depression, and certainly people who say, oh, I'm having a midlife crisis, is just a case of someone, of anyone really, being successful and then realizing that they're successful by someone else's definition of success.
Yes, exactly.
And you adopted those beliefs, but they don't actually reflect your own personal values, and so you feel everyone from the outside, you're more and more successful because you've got an education, you've got a relationship, you've got a job, blah, 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 blah. And the reality of the situation is that you're going, yeah, but I don't want any of those things, or I don't want this version of those things. And so you think you're succeeding, but by your own definition, if you really question yourself, you're not. So
that's really touching the nerve, I think, because lots of people think or believe they are being successful because they are following all the footsteps that society has given us during 20 or 30 years of our lives, or maybe more.
Yeah.
They see themselves with...
In my case, more.
Well, I'm hitting the 40, but okay.
Yeah, me too.
I will cut this part. I'm kidding. But yeah, people like have a regular job. They may have more or less of paycheck, maybe a second job sometimes, but they have a family, they have a job, they are stable. Sometimes they
stable.
Stable is a interesting concept in Europe right now, in the world, I think.
Yeah.
But people suddenly they hit the wall and they understand they're not happy. They have everything that society has told us to have, and then suddenly we're not happy. And I see that happening lots of times. And I think it's really a blessing to have people like you to catch up with all of these people, especially if we can do it before it happens.
Well, yeah, unfortunately not the case for me, but there we go.
yeah, I think we are kind of on the same boat there, but life is what it is, and I believe that every experience is a good experience. I don't see a bad experience just for being bad, because there is always something good after that, or a message. But I think that is a very important subject, and I'll say all over the world, but my world or the world I know is Europe, and I see that happening a lot. People are not happy. They are following the footsteps, but they're not happy. Yeah. So I believe that would be a starting point for you when you have a client and you are helping them with that. What is your approach to make them wake up and see life as it is and find their passions?
Well, because I'm dealing with high functioning aggression, the fundamental definition is that these people are seen as successful by society. So they're potentially quite high powered. We're talking accountants, lawyers, people who've gotten to, who are doing well for themselves and now find themselves, for whatever reason, just putting on a front. Hence, I'm sure you've seen the images that I use with the guy holding up the happy face and not actually, smiling himself and that sort of thing. And so the product that I'm working on, or that I'm providing people to start with, is just quite simply some habits that are relatively basic and simple to apply, that get in behind the value system and focus on getting back to basics. So sorting out your physical needs, sorting out your emotional needs, because until those are properly looked after, it's a very difficult process to actually sit down and start soul searching or whatever. So, high functioning depression is in effect a physical manifestation of the problems that we're talking about. So the idea is to, the symptoms that come up and the symptoms that I'm trying to sort of help deal with are things like problems with sleep, problems with food. Those are probably the key ones. But there's also problems with perfectionism. That's a massive problem for me. And so then we start to get into some mental habits, but they're mental habits that get in the way of emotional connection. And so that's why I put them in there.
Yes.
The idea, I think, for me at least, is to try and repair the things that it's reasonable to assume that everyone has in common, i.e. the need for food, the need for sleep, the need for social connection. And then once you've made some small changes that improve on those things, then you can start to look at things like, okay, what are my values? But that's probably further down the track. And I guess potentially my premium product, but I haven't really sort of worked my way through that yet. So
Yeah. It's really interesting. Getting back to basics is like my panic emergency procedure.
Pretty much.
Well, if I get lost, and I think everyone have these instincts. It's like a survival instinct. When we get lost and we are in panic, go back to the basics and find your true core, your center, and go again from
Yep.
there. And it's interesting that there is a physical manifestation of all of this. And I do understand what you say about sleep and food and perfectionism, because I have all of the three and I work on them every day, because that's really a consequence, and
Yeah.
everything is connected, of course. And I have my own strategies to go against this tendency of losing sleep or having a bad nutrition. But yes, it's really interesting seeing that and understanding there is this mental space that controls everything, and everything comes from the beliefs, right? As you said, we first have to believe that we can get better, that we are not fulfilled, and so acceptance is also part of the process, and that comes, I guess, before the belief process, right?
Yeah, it's like the classic line, isn't it? You have to recognize you have a problem before you can start to deal with the problem.
Yeah, exactly. Until then, there isn't no problem at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so this project of yours is related to any parts of your life, of a story you have behind that.
Oh, very much so. Yeah. There's a saying in psychology that research is me search, and I've
Awesome.
and loads of people who do psychology do it in order to understand themselves as much as anything else.
Yeah.
In my case, a major driver to starting my degree, my bachelor's a few years ago, was that my son was diagnosed as autistic, and I wanted to better understand what was going on with him. But in my final year of that degree, I properly confronted the fact that I was suffering from depression.
Okay.
And I think the part, my story, the bit that has the most relevance to this project, is the issue of perfectionism and the habits of thought surrounding perfectionism, because that's a major problem for me. And it's kind of weird because ultimately I think that the root cause isn't something that you would think would be a negative, but it's what I realize now that it fundamentally was, and that is when I was at school, I was the smart kid, and everyone knew it, and I knew it, and my impression from school was that intelligence is the thing that we're all there to get.
Yeah.
Knowledge is a product, obviously, and it's a way that you express it. But I was a smart kid, and I was a sponge. I could remember stuff, and I didn't need to study, and I didn't need to try, and so I didn't. And because I just thought, oh, I lucked out. I got the thing that everyone else wants. But simultaneously, I thought I was already there, and I thought that, and I defined myself by that thing, by the thing that I've got. And my mum, bless her, tried her best to get the school to challenge me, to make my life difficult.
Right.
And only one teacher ever really did. When I was like 8 or 9, I was doing the maths homework that 12 and 13-year-olds were doing. So that was the only time I ever really properly got challenged. And so I just drifted through school. I got above average marks, but I didn't study at all. Didn't need to. I got everything pretty quickly, and I had a good memory. And getting through school, that seems like the right way to go. But what it means to me as an adult is that I define myself by my intelligence, and that's where the perfectionism comes from. Is I think there's someone at the door. Can you give me just 1 second?
Yeah, of course.
Sorry about that.
No problem at all. Yeah.
Yeah. So now I've got this situation where I recognise that my beliefs about myself are unhelpful, and the mental habits that I've got are I'm highly self-critical, and that self-criticism leads to me not doing an awful lot because I beat myself up about failing to achieve. And that's fundamentally the thing that people oftentimes don't understand about perfectionism. It sounds like it's a positive orientation towards doing well, but actually it's a negative orientation away from doing anything that you might fail at. And that's the thing. Because I define myself by my intelligence, I never wanted to do anything which might allow people to realize that I'm not all that. And so that's, I've got 40 years plus of understanding that, this is how you're defined. And one of the lessons that I've taken from that, aside from this project with higher functioning, is that I'm very careful to compliment my kids on what they do rather than what they are. So I compliment them for effort and trying rather than being clever or being pretty or whatever the case may be. Because I think that's important and useful for them. But yeah, so for me, this project is very much about reminding myself daily to do the things that I need to do to undo all those decades of having a completely incorrect understanding of how how to approach things. And that's why, I've had dozens upon dozens of entrepreneurial ideas and never been able to actually finish them. In fact, I remember in fifth form, I got a comment from my art teacher where he said, "Alan has a lot of great ideas. It would be nice if he finished some of them." So I have all these awesome concepts and they just never quite been finished.
Yes, Alan. I'm so surprised to find you as a so similar person with me, because I really resonate with everything you're saying. And that's why I've joined this BizAcc course, because I was having everything. I have lots of ideas. I'm very creative. I've got all the energy and the passion, but things do not work because I spend too much time being perfectionist. And in my engineering background, because I have a huge memory problem, I keep always forgetting everything. So I had to find a way to overcome that. And my way is to understand things, because if I do understand how to go from A to B, I don't have to memorize it. So I compensate that.
Yeah. Whereas I don't have a memory problem per se. I think my problem actually is that these mental habits are so ingrained, and I'm now fighting against them so much.
Yes.
I have problems with real energy as far as actually spending. I can spend hours doing stuff, but I find it difficult to sort of generate the energy to be really about stuff, and I have to be, and I suppose that's one of the reasons why Brian talks about, focusing on something that you're passionate about, and even with something that I'm passionate about, it sometimes can be difficult to sort of generate the energy for myself to keep going when it comes, especially when, I said to my team during the one of the last business calls that I find the hustle very difficult because it's lots of small tasks with very little feedback as to how you're doing.
Yes.
And most of the feedback that you get is negative because people either ignore the email that you sent or don't turn up even if they do say that they'll come along, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And all those tiny little knockbacks don't sound like much, but one of the other problems with my particular brand of high-functioning aggression is that I take small social slights very personally. I can't just go, oh, they're probably busy. I go, they don't like me.
Yeah, I understand that. Yeah,
which is really unhelpful. Especially when I'm, such I'm so critical of myself and others. So I have a really good job of pushing people away, and then wondering why people aren't, prepared to sort of help out. So
but that's just the point. because when we are too perfectionist, it's more difficult to see the origin of the problem. And my tip for myself is always believing that I own the problem. So I've done something wrong, or I haven't done something that lead to these results if I don't like the result. And actually, being perfectionist for me is, as an artist, photography or music, is a very difficult obstacle to overcome the conclusion of the project. And there is this thing called criteria, stop criteria, to know when to stop,
Yes.
because we can always be working on it. Things can be perfect all the time, and we think that is never perfect. That's what I mean. So yeah, I really understand.
And of course, we're right. It's never perfect because there's no such thing as perfection ultimately.
Yes.
Because the more you engage with the thing, the more the definition of perfection changes. The further away that perfection is. So it's a never-ending cycle of never quite reaching it.
Yeah, and that's the funny parts, and that's why I've created this fear fantasy project as well, because I have fear in one side and fantasy on the other.
Right.
And people may give different names, and I'm discovering that different people give different names to those ends.
Yeah.
But my goal is really to explore what is in between, because that's the journey, that's our life, and we have to overcome some fears, or all the fears, or understand that there are no fears at all. That's just the product of our minds.
Yeah.
So we can achieve our goals, our fantasies, our wishes. And that's just like a direction.
And equally, sometimes we have to recognize that something is supposed to remain a fantasy. It is just a fantasy. But other fantasies are actually rehearsals for things we should be doing or things we should be aiming for.
So true, so true. And I've studied recently, because I do sports already, and I'm getting more and more into this mentality of sports. There are lots of athletes that get into depression when they achieve the top goals. And what happens, and this happens to lots of persons, not only in sports, when we achieve one goal, if we don't have any other goals after that, people lose references and they enter depression.
Yeah.
The important, I think, is to keep having goals. That's the fantasy that we'll never reach, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So fundamentally, the way that I talk about it from a psychological standpoint is that if someone's got a massive goal, like say when Tiger Woods won his first Golf Open, or when Pete Sampras back in the day, any major sports person, if they have this massive goal of this major thing and then achieve it, but don't, as you say, have goals that follow it, what fundamentally happens is the thing by which they define themselves is no longer true.
Yes.
And that's why, and that's just a form of situational depression. It's no different, really, than the end of a relationship, or the loss of a loved one, blah blah blah. I mean, I won't name names because I think it's inappropriate. It would be inappropriate. But I have a friend who is suffering from depression. And her depression is quite clearly linked to the fact that she's had a horrible, horrible breakup with her now ex-husband, and he manipulated the situation so he has the kids.
Yes.
She defines herself by being a mother, and now she is no longer a mother, and she's rudderless. She doesn't have this definition of self, and she doesn't have any real way to do anything about regaining that. And so, no surprises, depression has come along. And this is someone who, to that point, you would never have thought was someone who could be depressed, because they were always bubbly, always outgoing, all those sort of things. And now they're struggling to get out of bed some days. Unfortunately, she lost one job because of it. Fortunately, she's now got another job from a company that recognise her problem and are fine with it, because they recognise that when she's on her game, she's so that's good, and that's one step towards finding a new self-definition and going on. But in that instance, the person's lost a self-definition rather than realize the definition that they've got is wrong. But you can see how the identity is the thing that's broken. Your definition of the world is no longer cohesive, and so you're struggling to sort of plug the gaps, and that's a very draining mental process. So
completely. So I just came out with this question. So for you, how much important is for us to have our own space, to create our own beliefs with no interference from others? And how can we do it when we are deep in a relationship? Because I see that happen also. So how can we still be ourselves when under huge pressure from the outside?
I think that's probably one of the most difficult things to do, because sometimes the pressure from the outside isn't even something you necessarily recognize. I mean, as a human being, you are pretty much permanently embedded in the social space. And even when you're not, you still kind of are, because you're going to be in a room made by people. You're going to have artworks on the wall made by people, and so on and so forth. And so you can never genuinely extricate yourself from humanity in its entirety. I mean, you can go off grid and go into the woods and live intentionally and all that sort of stuff. But, what's going on in your head is always going to be, in some part, handed to you by other people. And the only thing that you can ultimately do is test to see whether what's been handed to you is something that you think is worthy of you. I know a lot of people can get into a right state because they there's an expectation placed upon them by someone, and then there's an argument that ensues when that expectation has failed. And if someone else's expectation of you is inappropriate, it's not your fault that you don't live up to it. It's their fault for having an inappropriate expectation. So it's a question of not so much detaching yourself from people. It's just sort of going, hey, hang on a second. I've adopted this belief about myself without question. Let's actually question it and see if it's worthy of me. And if it's not, then hasta la vista.
Exactly. Yeah, it's truly amazing to get in touch with this evolution, and I'm grateful for you here in this course to share your process and your business, and even launching our business, right? Because this is a new business for you, or something that you had from before and started to.
It's a new business. I mean, I came onto the BizAcc with another project, which I'm still working on, and certain aspects of it are related to this idea. It ties in with values and the importance of living true to yourself, but in a slightly less direct way. But equally, not a project that lends itself as readily to being sort of a media-fronted business. Whereas this project sort of came out of that and a couple of other things that I'm sort of doing in the background. And I sort of went, you know what, all these lessons make me realize that actually I do have something of value for people, and that is that I'm hugely analytical. I have a solid psychological background as far as training is concerned. I'm in the middle of a master's, for example. I mean, okay, I'm not a PhD yet, but but I know that a lot of the sort of self-help stuff, and that's true in the world and in the BizAcc. A lot of it is there's spiritual approaches, there's physical approaches, and so on and so forth, and that's fine. And there's a market for those things out there, but there are a lot of people like me who don't have a lot of time for the touchy-feely stuff quite so much, and want to be able to sort of understand in more empirical terms and what's the scientific reason behind this, and so on and so forth. And so that's kind of the approach that I'm taking. I mean, I can take anyone's sort of spiritual approach and explain why scientifically it probably is the mechanism that's causing it to work. But I don't see terribly much point in applying that to those approaches, because I recognize that the narrative power of having like a more spiritual approach is going to be beneficial to people who deal with narrative and so on and so forth, rather than necessarily focusing on the facts. The facts are still there; they're just hidden by story.
Yeah,
which is fine. But
and so, Alan, where do you see yourself and your business, let's say, in 5 years, within 5 years?
Well, I'm hopeful that 5 years from now, I will have a much better idea as to what it is that I'm trying to do with the business, because it's still a bit more amorphous and sort of difficult to put my finger on. But I mean, just in the last few days, I've had some ideas about ways to sort of shape the business and the direction to push. Obviously, the idea is that I can virtualize as much of the IP as possible, so into video-based product and so on and so forth. And the stuff that is that requires me to show up and be there is the stuff that I can charge enough for to make it worth my while. Ideally, whilst I'm on a beach somewhere. So, doing retreats and using space away from the usual social ties to investigate the causal mechanisms that make one, inwardly focused perfectionist.
Yes, of course. That took me to my 3-hour walk experience, and that's like, but in a short lapse of time, because trying to disconnect from the world. And I've done retreats in the past because I have a martial arts background, Japanese martial arts and yoga too, and Reiki and energies, etc. I've done those retreats like one weekend also, and but even for 3 hours, as long as we can disconnect from the world, we immediately start a auto-healing process. We go through everything that is keeping us from seeing the reality, introspection, and then analyze reality as it is. And it's really a blessing to do that. And retreats, in my point of view, are essential for us, even if only for 3 hours. You have done your 3-hour walk, right?
Yeah, I posted about it. Yeah, it was good. I mean, I posted about it last week because I decided to go for a walk really late at night. And so I was walking through the streets of London at 1 o'clock in the morning. And it was interesting because, it's a big city that's teeming with people, and yet you're walking around at that time of night. And I avoided the main roads for the most part, just because it was the exhaust fumes and such. Just the lack of people, and those few people that were there were quiet. And I said it was eerie and serene because it was very quiet, but it was kind of weird because like I'm in London, but it's quiet, and and people aren't making a heck of a racket and so on and so forth. So yeah,
that's awesome. And finally, Alan, do you have any question or comments to do here on Mindshapers? Anything you want to add?
I don't think so at this stage. I think we've gone through an awful lot so far. As I say, a lot of what I'm trying to do is I mean, this week, the next couple of weeks really, is about sort of trying to get back to basics. So going back through the BizAcc course, and especially for me, because I kind of changed horses in the second or third week, and so I need to go back to the start and sort of redo some of those early bits.
Go back to the basics again.
Back to the basics again, absolutely. To sort of make sure that I've plugged all of those holes and that's all working. But in the meantime, I've got people. I'm talking with people with regards to the possibility of JVs and that sort of thing. So I'm sort of working it from both ends at the moment.
Yeah, that's an awesome experience. Yeah, of course.
But things are moving forward. But it's just a question of like sitting down and properly making sense of it, because obviously in the panic to finish the various elements, it wasn't. Especially for a new business, it wasn't necessarily as cohesive a story as you need it to be in order to be able to explain it to people that are coming in on board. But coupled with a few other things that I have to do over the next couple of weeks. Really busy times, but yeah.
Yeah, let's keep the pace, and we'll be there.
Yeah. Well, that's the hope, certainly.
Yeah. I'll be there to pull everyone up also, and I feel that we've made great connections here, and we have great teams and great people, and that everyone is pushing and pulling everyone else. Don't get behind and go faster. And
yeah,
I really feel that we have that strong connection, and I also believe that we will keep those connections years and years from now. And I'm already seeing from myself and from the others that there are lots of JVs and happening backstage with all the teammates, It's really, really interesting and something to explore. And I'll be in London for the graduation weekend, so I'll be there too. So.
Yeah, no, I saw that. So I look forward to meeting you in the flesh, as it were.
Yeah, of course, it's the 3D experience.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Alan, so I'm going to stop the recording, but before, thank you very much for being here, and I'm grateful for this experience, and I've learned a lot with all of you, still am, and part of my journey here is to help people and to give value to all of you and put some more value in this world with our experiences and putting our voices out here. Thank you again for being present in the show, and we will see us very soon.
Sounds good, mate. Sounds good. Look forward to it.
Okay, I'm going to stop this.